All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Harshi, like the Hershey's chocolate from Gainsight. Today, I'm going to talk about product-led release experience. So, specifically, how to inculcate that experience part in your monthly, quarterly, biannual release process. So, before I dive into that, little bit about myself. I'm the Client Outcomes Director at Gainsight PX. I'm an evangelist and one of the founding members of the Gainsight PX, or the Product-Led Growth Client Outcomes Team. I currently work with the Gainsight's largest enterprise customers, which include Adobe, Dun and Bradstreet, Splunk, Autodesk, and I also head up the client outcomes team for PX. I directly work with the product leaders in helping them drive adoption at scale by employing the product-led growth strategies with the use of our product, which is Gainsight PX. My past stints also include working at and with Fortune 500 companies like Facebook, Ernst& Young, and at startups managing Facebook, THL, Chevron, and so on and so forth. I'm also currently involved in Gainsight in developing product-led growth best practices. And I'm going to actually walk you through in my next couple of slides what that PLG flywheel framework and best practices and Gainsight look like. A little bit about Gainsight PX. Many of you may have already heard about Gainsight PX. For those of you who have not, Gainsight PX is a product experience platform which helps you really understand what your users are doing in the product, how they're interacting, the user behavior. It collects the usage data real time and also makes it very actionable for you to deliver in-product experiences at scale to help them achieve desired outcomes. The three core pillars of Gainsight PX are product analytics, so really collecting that real-time data and deep insights into your customers and how they are interacting with your product, which then you can use to trigger or engage users through your product at scale, again, very real time and based on their usage, their behavior, their needs, objective, persona, and so on and so forth. And then creating that feedback loop where you can collect qualitative and quantitative data to learn how your users feel about your product, about specific workflows, and so on and so forth. So you can make it actionable from 2 points of view by improving your product, number one, or passing it out to respective teams, like for example, customer success teams to take action on that feedback. Currently, our product is trusted by some of the industry leaders like Adobe. Many product teams at Adobe are using Gainsight PX. Splunk, Dun and Bradstreet, this very cool startup coming up, Seismic, and then we have Autodesk Lifesize amongst many other customers who use Gainsight PX today. All right, so now that we're done a little bit with the introduction about myself and the product, let's talk shop. And let's get into the weeds of the thing of why we really here are, and learning more about how to inculcate experience in your release cycles and release processes for your product. So in the next 25 to 30 minutes, expect some of these topics to be covered. More broadly, the two categories which would be covered in the next 30 minutes would be the strategic best practices and like tactical best practices from a PX product specific point of view, or if you had something in-house or if you were using a similar product. So again, it'll be a very transferable knowledge and very much applicable to any kind of product that you're using today to do in-product experiences for your product. So on the strategic part of it, I'm going to, in short, cover about the product-led growth, what that flywheel and framework means with respect to designing for adoption and specifically for release experiences. Even going into the very basic of who should be the responsible team and what's the definition of release experience, because many a time when working with customers we see that folks are even trying to figure out who should be the team responsible for running these programs. And then going into, what are the typical challenges, what should be our typical goals, what should be the KPIs that we should be tracking for success. And then based on that, what's our recommended strategy for that release experience of your product. Once we've covered these, then we will move on to a more tactical stuff where we'll go into very specific items of how you can actually implement some of these recommended strategies. What are the templates that you can use? And what does that crawl, walk, and run of that implementation look like, so that you're not caught in that endless loop of shooting for the ideal implementation from day one, but are rather breaking it up in crawl, walk, and run to get to that ideal stage in a step-by-step manner. And then, how you can use different analytics and reports, what are our best practices and recommendations around using some in-product, in-app engagements and guidances. Sound good? All right. So product-led growth. Many of you in the product industry have probably, come across this term. Traditionally, it is regarded as a GTM strategy for many companies, where we are making the product accessible to our prospective customers very much within the sales cycle. So it brings down the cost of acquisition, and the sales cycles are shorter and helps customers get acquainted with the product at a very early stage. But at Gainsight, with our product specifically at Gainsight PX, what we are looking at is transcending that product-led growth experience just beyond the pre-sales cycle, but also covering it in the post-sales cycle to be able to deliver that seamless customer experience through the product. So this is a flywheel that we have developed at Gainsight. If you notice, the customer journey is the heart and the center of this flywheel. Starting with their first milestone, which is onboarding, progressing to adoption, moving on to retention, and with growth being the ultimate goal. So based on this, we see two themes coming up with the product-led growth, which is designed for adoption. The first is employing the tech touch strategy or tech touch experience to manage your customers, which could be pretty much long tail. And then the second is where you have high touch model, specifically, let's say for your enterprise or mid-market accounts, how can we plug in that tech touch in product experiences in your existing high touch model? So think of it as a hybrid tech touch and high touch. So those are the two key things we try to solve for with product-led growth in the post-sales cycle with the customer. So think of this slide as the double click on the previous slide. So with the product-led growth strategy for the adoption, we see typically these 16 use cases or plays with most of our customers, and how we can solve for these with product experience platforms. And for purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus only on release experience. Like, how can we add that experience part to the release cycle of your product? How can we use the product itself as a driver, as an engine, as a vehicle to inculcate that experience at scale and deliver very personalized experience for your end users? So starting from the very basic, right? Like, who should be the team responsible for it? Typically with release experience, I'm hoping you should not be in those conversations about who owns this. Typically, it should be owned by the product team. But also, in many cases today, there are secondary teams or other cross-functional teams which help with certain motions within the company. So same for release experience. Product marketing is a key part of that release announcement and messaging as a GTM strategy as well. So definitely working very closely with them, and also in many cases, in many companies, documentation team is another key team which collaborate on putting documentation together about that release. So from a definition point of view, a release experience goes beyond simply shipping new features. And I'm sure most of the product managers are working around this concept now, that shipping new features is a thing of the past as part of the release cycle, right? Now it is mostly focused on product teams' coordinated effort and creating an entire end-to-end experience for the end users, which start from announcing the new product release, enabling the end users and your customers, and also driving adoption of these newly released or shipped features. And then not just ending it there, but also tracking success of that adoption, tracking the outcomes that the customers are able to drive, and gathering feedback on these new features and enhancements to very proactively incorporate in our next release cycle. So think of the release experience not just as shipping new features or not just as announcing those new features, but going much beyond that and focusing on driving user awareness, enabling the user within product guides and guidances, and tracking the success and the outcomes through those feature releases. From a goal point of view, these are the typical goals that you may already be thinking. Maybe one resonates with you, all resonates with you. We urge you to think about all of these goals when you're thinking of release experiences. So number one is really enabling our customers to drive outcomes, right? Like the key goal is really with our new features and enhancements, we want to help our customers in driving more value and efficiency and ultimately reaching their goals with our product. Then the second is, raising awareness. While the key goal is driving outcomes, it definitely starts with raising awareness of the newly shipped or released features. So think of this as a vehicle to demonstrate velocity and get them excited about your new product release. Like many a time in B2B, you don't expect users actually to use the feature right away. Instead, it is a preliminary step towards the feature activation, right? So it's a very common thing, you want to definitely raise awareness. They may not adopt it right away, but you want them to be in the knowing of this feature so that you're activating, that use case, that feature, that mindset already so they can get to it when they're ready to use it. Another goal is boosting adoption of your entire product, right? Like this is very common that, there are specific features that our customers may be looking at in your product release. So a couple of features can really boost adoption of your entire product and also can help with increasing retention. Sometimes these release experiences can also be actually used to re-engage users who have lost interest in the product and may also be considering switching to a competitor. So using those email engagements to re-engage users who have signed up into your system but haven't logged into your system for over 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. Release announcements are a great way of rekindling that interest in your product and bringing them back into the system. And lastly, a great release experience helps in increasing customer loyalty and stickiness to your product and your company. This helps them feel more positive about your company and the product itself as you align your product's vision with solving their problems. They feel that they have a voice in your roadmap and that you're continuing to improve and add value. Like this is something we commonly see on a day-to-day basis with most of our customers. After every product release, we get great comments and notes from our customers saying, hey, we love your roadmap and we feel very confident of where the product is heading and in the company and the team. So these are like key goals from a release point of view. Now, with those goals, how do we measure the progress against those goals? How do we measure success, right? Just shipping features is not a success by itself anymore these days. So how do you measure the success of these releases? So as you can see, I've broken it up into two categories. One is measuring the success of the release itself, of the features itself, of the adoption itself. And the second, actually measuring the return on the investment that you made in your product, right? With your engineering hours and resources, with your documentation team, and like the trade-offs that were made. So kind of measuring that investment that you made. So from the first category, if you had to measure the success of the release itself, some of the key indicators could be measuring the user awareness itself, right? So if you're doing in-product messages and guidances, measuring the performance, the completion rates, the view rates are a great way to measure the awareness. Like how many folks actually, how many end users completed my in-product release announcement? What has been the survey response rates to my new release, right? So that helps me capture the awareness part, which was our second goal in the previous slide. Second is the adoption trend. That's a great leading indicator, right? Like, what are the adoption trends of my newly released features? Comparing the adoption trends with the rest of the products, right? Um, Measuring it by different ARR segmentation. So, really looking at that adoption trends in the initial first few weeks is important, but also making sure that adoption is on a sustained basis, as opposed to initial adoption and then a dip later because there was lots of messaging around the release, but later there was a dip in the adoption. So those are some key trends and metrics that you want to keep a pulse on from the initial get-go of your release. Thirdly is the retention, right? So features which are driving stickiness. So which new features that you released are actually driving stickiness in your product? What's the user retention percent with some of the specific features that were past part of the release? So that helps us really understand whether it's a core feature, golden feature, it's nice to have, or need to have, those kind of analysis behind the newly released features. Um, then the fourth one to think of is actually tracking the usability of the score or the new feature, right? Like customer effort score feedback and doing it in-app customer effort score feedback is a great way to capture that sentiment around the usability of these newly released features. For example, many releases actually include features which come with usability enhancements and improvements. So for those specific releases, for those specific features, we actually want to capture the in-app customer effort score through in-app vehicles. And fourthly, and the fifth and the last one on this particular section would be the sentiment around the release itself. So really, you're using a combination of surveys to assess the user sentiment of the release of specific features, to get that feedback early on in the cycle and making sure we're incorporating those feedbacks in our product, to help customers achieve their outcomes. So these are some key indicators that you want to think of while measuring the success of the release. The second category is around return on product investment. So this is typically measured by business impact or the customer outcome. Now there may not be a direct way for you to capture this in product, and this may involve collaborating with other teams, for example your customer success team, or you can use in-app surveys to capture if you were able to drive any business impact with these new releases or new features, right? So kind of associating new features or enhancements with customers making progress or achieving their business goals. And even actually doing feature attribution, where from the data itself you can measure the feature usage by the account revenue or the ARR segmentation. So these are some great indicators of measuring success of your release, both internally and externally. All right. With that, moving on to what are some of the current challenges and pain points today, that may not be allowing us to focus on some of the things that we discussed in the prior slides, right? So again, the first bucket here is really enabling and educating the users is one of the current challenges. So the first point that comes to mind around that is the how do we share that information around the release, right? Like today, most of those release announcements are done through simple emails, which actually lacks the experience in that whole process, right? And usually, given today's world where we are living TMI, too much information, most of these emails or docs are mostly missed or ignored. So even though we are doing our job of making releases, incorporating customer feedback, announcing it through emails, they may not actually get to the right end users in the right fashion. Then the second challenge is relevancy. If you've noticed, the bulk of the release notes or information are mostly not relevant to all the users, right? For example, new users, while they are learning the basics, your release notes may not be super relevant to them. So how can we make it more relevant? And how can we make sure that our specifics around release experiences and announcements reach the right end users at the right time? The second bucket in the challenge and the pain point is really, again, capturing the success of the release, right? This may be a very common challenge and pain point. This is a very common question I see come up in many product groups where PMs are trying to brainstorm on, hey, how do I measure the success of this new release that I just recently made? So measuring health in like scalable ways to kind of promote and also measure adoption of your new feature, excuse me, is a challenge today. It probably, if unless you're using some kind of product analytics tool, you probably have to designate an engineer who would write a bunch of code and measure the success and the adoption of these new releases. The second challenge is measuring the outcomes. Like, how do you know whether these features move the needle on your customer perception of usability, or it helped them achieve their goals and outcomes, right? So now with these automated tools out there with Gainsight PX and Gainsight CS with the integration, it makes it much more easier to measure these outcomes at scale. For these teams to come together and work or get out of a silo and start working together from the same single source of truth. So in the next few slides, I'm hoping to address some of these challenges and pain points. Specifically, this slide, these are 5 recommended strategies from a release experience point of view of how we can inculcate that experience in the release process to your end users. So firstly, thinking about using multi-channel promotion. This can include doing in-product announcements and education for your customers. So not just raising awareness, but also educating them, training them, enabling them on how to actually take advantage of that product, of that feature, and making it more outcome driven, more use case driven, as opposed to more feature driven. Then also using other channels like doing direct messaging to users, to emails, having product marketing, writing a blog post, doing roadmap webinars, and other thought leadership content around specific use cases and how each of those features actually address specific user pain points. Using multi-channel promotion, in the next few slides, I have a specific template that I can share with you that will help you think through what promotion channels to use and what should be the cadence. Cross-functional enablement, making sure that you're involving the right teams at the right time and ensuring that they're enabled to support the entire release cycle, starting all the way from the marketing team to your sales team to your customer success or customer support teams. This is super important because when you release and your customers start using your product, you want to make sure your customer facing teams are up to speed and enabled to support the customers. They know how these features work, what the use cases they solve for. And also your marketing team and sales team, so that when they're talking to the prospects, they're proactively putting ahead these points, which address the user pain points. So definitely enabling the cross-functional teams, super important part of the strategy. Making your release announcements and experience very contextualized. So not every feature, not every new feature that is going to matter to not every new feature is going to matter to your every user, right? So how can we make it a very personalized experience based on your user persona within the product itself to drive awareness and adoption of those new features? So that's it's a great strategy to think about. I'm going to cover some of those tactical points in my next few slides, but doing personalized in-product release experiences are a super way to engage the customers, and you can track the success to the completion rates of your in-product messages. Show and then tell. So first, show your users what the new features will do for them, and then tell them how it works. So like think of it in 2-step flow, right? So first, do an announcement, simple announcement in a release slider format and say, hey, these are the few highlights or features of this new release. And then after a couple of days, follow up with telling them actually how it works, how it helps them, drive outcomes and business goals specific to their needs. And then lastly, making sure that you're measuring the success before going and building the next set of features. So really avoiding that product death cycle that starts from launching, spike in usage, then growth flattens, and then we go and adding more features. So really like the KPIs that I shared in the previous slide, keeping a pulse on that and making sure the adoption is not just a spike on the initial days, but is a sustained spike will be super important. And doing that closed loop feedback with your end users would be super important in your new release cycle. All right. So that was the strategic part of this playbook or the best practices that I wanted to share with you. Now we will be moving towards a more tactical approach, of how to incorporate some of the strategies that we discussed in a more easily and doable format, using a product like Gainsight PX or a similar product that you may be using or something that you may have in-house. And if you don't have any of that, I urge you to start exploring a product like this because it helps you scale, helps you be efficient, and helps you collaborate with your other teams, and helps you automate a lot of these processes that you may be already doing in a manual way today. All right. So you may be thinking that, hey, in every release cycle that I do on a quarterly basis, I have like 15 to 20 features that come out, right? Or you may have a monthly cycle, or you may have a biannual cycle. This really depends on the stage of your own company and your own product. But the key question remains, how do I know, how do I prioritize which features I should go after for with my end product experiences and driving product adoption with my end users. So this template, will help you prioritize those top 3 to 5 actions, workflows, or features that you want to go for in every release, right? The objective would be for you to map your new release workflow or features. You can prioritize them based on the pain points. Focus on specific personas. So column 2 helps you, make it very contextual, helps you in identifying the specific persona. Then column 3 helps you identify whether it's a new user or a user which is coming up for renewal, or a user who is in onboarding, or a user in adoption. So based on that, it helps you define the relevancy of that feature. And then what is the goal with that feature? What is the end goal, right? Like, what do you ultimately want the end users to do? So putting it out there helps you actually define that experience for them, and your content around it, your messaging around it, and ultimately identifying what would be your success KPI when you're actually rolling out these features and rolling out the in product programs to announce and release these features. Now, persona, how do you identify the persona, right? Some of you may be already doing this, but if you are already aren't thinking about these things, these are good things to start thinking about and incorporating in your product, like mapping your ICP, very common product marketing term, ideal customer profile. Now, in products like PX, we have attributes at the user level, we have attributes at the account level, so that we can make our release announcements or any in product messaging very contextual to the user and to the customer. So really understanding and capturing this in your system, like what are the objectives, what's the stage in which this user or the account is, what is their role, are they an admin, or they're a designer, are they a viewer, or are they a manager? What is the entitlement, like are there any paywall features, are there any free features? What was their first sign up date? Because one of the reasons is you want to exclude your new users from your release announcement, because you don't want to throw in too many features on them as soon as they signed up on your product. From an account model point of view, what package they are in, is free, select, prime, because all of your newly released features may not be applicable, and you don't want to always announce all your features to all your packages if it's not applicable to them. What is the account objective? What's their ROI productivity? What's the annual contract value? Number of users on that account. What's the renewal date? If a renewal is coming up and this was a very specific ask from certain customers, you definitely want to show them this in product announcement. So really mapping your ICP there, and capturing those user and account attributes, so that when you're doing these release experiences and announcements, you can make it very contextual to the end user and the customer based on these attributes. Defining a multi-channel program. Now, if you remember on my strategy slide, this was the first point, thinking of a multi-channel promotion, right? So thinking of the multi-channel promotion, think of two key pillars. One is your in-product announcements. That's the best way, easiest way, and the most scalable way to engage with your users, because that's the place where your end users interact with you the most. So think of your product as the voice of your company and of your product to your customers. Your customers may be able to talk to your CSMs, your sales guys, maybe a couple of times in a quarter, in a month, or maximum a week. But your product talks to your customer pretty much every day and even multiple times in a day, right? So how can we actually use our product as the channel, as our voice in communicating with the customer? How can we help them unlock value every single time they come into our product, right? Super easy, super scalable. You can do it real time and you can make it very contextual. So thinking of this multi-channel program when you want to promote your release and adding that experience part to your release process and announcement. So from an in-product point of view, you can think of doing release sliders so that it highlights the key USPs of that release so that it gets your users very excited. Post that, you can follow up that release announcement with a 1 to 3 week user nurturing program where you are prioritizing 3 to 5 features, as we discussed in a couple of earlier slides on the template, based on the goal, user persona, and the stage, so that you're doing that nurturing program, guiding them through that new feature with how it particularly serves their pain point and helps them achieve their goal. Right. So really doing targeted guides, in-app guides based on your ICP and user segmentation. And if this is missing, if your ICP data is missing today, you can actually collect it in-app. You can design a nice in-app survey and say, hey, are you a customer success manager? Are you a product manager? Are you an engineer? Based on that, once they click, it actually updates their user attributes. If you're using a product like PX, super easy to do it. And then once you've collected that attribute, you can make these guides very contextual. Then definitely at the end of that 1 to 3 weeks program, after you have rolled out the new release, collecting that CSAT or some kind of a user sentiment feedback to understand how the release went. How do your customers feel about it? Is there any substantial feedback that you need to incorporate in your product? So kind of think of it as a closed loop feedback process. And then enabling a self-serve mechanism. If you have a bot-like bot-like feature in your product, or if you're using a product which lets you use a bot. So in Gainsight PX, we have this little bot, which we can place it anywhere on the screen. It serves as a on-demand self-serve assistant, like a checklist, where you can actually add these user nurturing program guides, your new release highlights, your past release highlights, and so on and so forth. So again, in product is a great way and a great vehicle, to really enrich that experience with every release cycle of your product. And the other channels can include email announcements, which is already a very common announcement today, but you can actually do a very coordinated effort here with in-product announcement versus email announcements. And then with certain big releases, you can also do release webinars where your product managers can specifically talk about outcome-driven release versus feature-driven. And then, many of you may have online communities for your products, of course, posting your release announcements and updates there or in different user groups. Excuse me. And then updating any thought leadership content around these new release experiences, and any support and documentation that you need to add. All right. So now coming into the specific workflow, this is a workflow that we commonly work with our customers. And the reason for breaking it up in crawl, walk, and run is with the crawl, we want to make sure that you're easily set up and get quick confidence with using products like Gainsight PX, or if you're doing this in-house. Of course, if you use products like Gainsight PX, it takes less than an hour or two to set up these kind of in-app messages and build the rules around it, which is pretty much a very UI-driven motion. And then in the walk run, our focus is that when the customer is comfortable with the crawl motion, they continue to drive value in the walk phase with more advanced features, and then with run, we help them drive up that maturity curve with our product. Um, so this specific slide really talks about what you should think of if you wanted to get started with something like this in your release experience or in your release cycle. If you're already doing some of what is mentioned in the crawl, what elements from walk can you incorporate, or some elements from walk and some elements from run that you can incorporate. Also very much focusing on the KPIs at each stage here, because we put a lot of premium in capturing these success metrics and KPIs to ensure that with any of our release experiences, we are moving in the right direction, capturing the right metrics, and reiterating very much as needed. What's needed in PX, if you're using PX or a product like PX, this column will be something very relevant to you. If not, these are features or configurations you can think of setting up in any of the tools that you're using today to achieve any of these crawl, walk, run phases. So I'll do a quick double click on each of these in my following next slides. But just to give you a quick review of this particular slide, so even starting with a simple in-app dialogue or a slider to announce your new release and highlight those key components are a great way to add that end user experience along with your release email announcements that you may be sending. The KPIs to track at this stage would be what is the performance of that in-app or in-product message that you sent out? What's the completion rate? What's the view rate? So what's the exposure that actually your announcement got with respect to your end users? Was it 30%, 40%, 70%? Out of that, what was the completion? 50, 40, 45. So that helps you really quickly identify what was the exposure of your, or what was the reach or the engagement of driving awareness of your new release. Then capturing the feature trend adoption in the first 2 to 4 weeks post-release. And then when you go into the walk and the run phase, ensuring that you're continuing to capture or monitor the adoption, even the first 4 weeks, to make sure that adoption is sustained and is not dropping after the initial spike. Then when you go to the walk phase, once we have done the initial awareness and release announcement, actually going into those specific features as we discussed earlier, using that template, identifying your top 3 to 5 workflows or features from your new release, and actually giving end users a walkthrough so that you're enabling them, training them on how to use that specific feature, and also highlighting the pain point that it solves for them or the outcome that will help them achieve using that specific product. Otherwise, many times what happens is we may announce, the user may know that, oh, this feature exists. They may not be able to correlate it back to how it helps them, how it helps them achieve their outcomes or solve their pain points. So that is super important. Then you can also use email to actually re-engage the inactive users by highlighting some of your release items. Bot is something I mentioned earlier. If you have the option to use a bot-like thing, add that what's new category in there so that your past 2 releases, including today's release, is included in that bot category so that it's very handy on demand for your end users. And then also placing those feature walkthroughs and guides within that bot so that your users can take it at their pace and start using your features, when they are ready. And then, of course, adding a rating survey there to measure user perception of your newly released features. Now, the KPIs that you want to capture here are, are there any increase in your DAUs, WAUs, or monthly active users based on, what's relevant to your product? What are the rating scores? What are the trends? What are the adoption trends in new features? So definitely those, success indicators, something you want to keep a track on. And going into the run phase is, if again, Gainsight PX offers badges. If you have that option, using badges, these badges multiple of them sit on throughout your entire product. So the customer looks at it and they can trigger it if they want to, walk through that entire guide for that new feature. So this is a great way of, enabling and educating your new users about or your users about your new features. And then, guide nurturing, doing intervals. You don't want to overwhelm your users. Doing pre and post customer effort score survey to measure usability improvements. Again, are great ways to incorporate in your release cycle and that experience part of every release. Some of the KPIs that you want to measure here are, any improved customer effort score, which is pre and post release, or the guide completion rates, what are the user retention percentages, what are the feature adoption trends. Yeah. The next few slides, I'm just actually going to probably quickly glance through them. I've added some specific screenshots to show you what these in-product release experiences may look like. The text of it, pretty much covered it in the previous slide, but this is what a slider should look like. When your customer goes into your product, this is what like a 5 to 6 step slider would look like, which highlights the specific USPs of that particular release cycle of yours. In the walk phase, this is the bot that I've been talking about. This is this little bot, that little guy that sits on one of the corners of your product, which the user can trigger pretty much on demand. So for release notes, you can add that category there around what's new. And then, this is like an in-app survey that you might want to do, a simple one. How was your experience, to get that initial user sentiment? And then, you can incorporate a more detailed feedback like this one, like a customer effort score, if you wanted to collect that more detailed survey. This is the badge that I was referring to. So you can have multiple of these badges sitting around your product, which covers your entire release experience. You could even start with a simple tooltip, which is more attention seeking from your end users. So these are, very fast, very real time, very contextual, and very scalable ways of inculcating experience in your release process and driving that awareness and adoption and engaging your users with your new release. All right, almost coming up to an end here. My last few slides with the experience part of it. Now that we spoke about the strategic goals, KPIs, we spoke about tactically how to kind of handle this release experience. I want to spend a few minutes on specific reports, specific analytics that actually help understand the success of your release experience, of your release cycle. Some of these are very specific, again, to our product Gainsight PX, but a lot of other similar products, offer these reports. So if you're using some similar reports, or you have something built out, you should totally take advantage of these trends and reports to measure the success of your release, right? For example, MAU analysis is a great way to understand your benchmarks, and then month over month, how did that release experience, release email engagements impacted your MAUs? Did it help drive up the active users? Did it help bring back inactive users into your system? Is a great way to capture the impact of your release onto your overall MAUs of the product. Adoption report is a very specific report, again, available in Gainsight PX. This helps you measure the adoption of your any feature within which you're tracking through Gainsight PX. So with your new release, you want to capture and track the adoption of new feature and releases, and how they are being adopted by your end users. Is it 50%, 75%, what are the trends month over month, week over week, so on and so forth. This gives you a good insight into how successful your release or how useful your features are. User retention, again, is a very specific report in Gainsight PX. Again, available in similar products or similar offerings. It helps you understand the user retention. Ideally, it also helps us understand, whether the product has reached its product market fit or not. But definitely measuring user retention before and after release to determine the impact of your release on specific product and sticky features are a great way to again measure success of your new release. So those were a few reports and analytics that you could use to measure the adoption and the usage. Now, to understand the behavior, there are two specific reports that I want to call out here is the Path Analyzer. It really helps you understand the user journey, identify areas of products where we need to optimize or reduce friction points, along with in the interim, where we need to provide a guide opportunity in that release experience to our users. Funnel analysis is a report that helps us review workflow completion rates. So, for example, if in completing a new workflow that was part of your release cycle, there were 5 key steps that you wanted your users to take, can actually track the completion rates and see where the key drop off it. So where are the key drop offs in that flow? So that helps you identify optimization needs in your product and needs where you can address with interim guides if it's not super intuitive to your users. So these are great reports to leverage when measuring success of your release experience and helping users with your new release and new features. In-app engagement or in-product performance is, of course, a great way to measure the awareness part of your release experience. So measuring the number of engagement views, completion rates, so on and so forth. Doing attributions like, filtering by engagements to attribute the feature adoption. So you can say the feature adoption of this particular feature where I actually showed in-app message versus adoption of this feature where I did not show an in-app message. So you can see and compare that adoption trends and make attributions to your in-product messages. Survey analytics, of course, you want to track those trends. So again, these are some readily available metrics and reports within Gainsight PX. So, very easy to track those trends and, feedback from your customers. Also, it's good to track did the usability improvements that came as part of your release experience, did that actually improve your NPS scores or customer effort scores that you may be tracking otherwise for many weeks or months. And then after you have collected data, analyzed it, of course, you want to make it very actionable. So build, learn, and improve. So if adoption is not as high as you had expected, identify the friction points using some of these success indicators and reports, and improve usability and discoverability either through making changes to your product or through your end product experiences and guides for your end users. Very quickly, wanted to share here, the custom dashboards that Gainsight PX offers, or you can build this in any of your analytics tool that you may be using. So the recommended themes overall to track the overall product health are across 4 categories: adoption depth, breadth, user engagement, and user sentiment. Right. So when thinking of adoption depth, you want to look at trends for a given time frame by the active users, number of active accounts, what's the user retention percentage, and so on and so forth. When thinking about adoption breadth, which is the second measure here, you want to measure the trends again for a given time frame by usage or adoption of your app's top 3 to 5 core or golden features. That gives you a good understanding. It's a good leading indicator of your overall product health, adoption, and usage. The third element here would be user engagement. So what is their interaction with our in-product guides, in-product messages, completion rates? What are the average active days? Is it 3 days a week, 5 days a week, 7 days a week? What's the average session duration? It's 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's very customizable and specific to your product. you like sometimes spending too much time is not a great indicator, because it could mean your users are trying to figure out how to use the product. So you need to find that optimal, what's the average session duration, number of active days, and so on and so forth. But the first step would be even to tracking these metrics. And the fourth element would be user sentiment. So, user sentiment trends like NPS, what were their responses to our release experiences, ratings, any feature specific feedback to capture results, outcomes, and ROI. So these four elements will give you a nice overall, understanding and benchmark of your product overall health. And if you also segment it by customer lifecycle, for example, customers who are in onboarding versus an adoption, or in growth, it helps you give a nice picture of your overall product health and account health. This is just a screenshot of the previous slide that I shared here. So this is a nice screenshot from our custom dashboard in Gainsight PX. This is the adoption depth. So, depth, like what are the active users, active accounts, what is my user retention of last 9 weeks, week over week. What are the trends of my active accounts week over week? What are my trends of active users week over week, right? So this is the adoption depth. Then adoption breadth, my top feature one, what's the adoption trend for the last 9 weeks or 8 weeks? What is the adoption of my top feature two, and so on and so forth. And then this is the user engagement, like average days active, average session duration, and so on and so forth. And then here is the fourth element, which is the user sentiment. So what are the sentiment of the user from an NPS point of view, or any other surveys that you may be running? So this gives you a nice snapshot on an ongoing basis of your overall product health. And then lastly, this is really best practice around if you were to use in-app engagements, if you were to do a release announcement, the recommendation of, hey, use a slider followed by a guide. If you were doing some kind of another important announcement, use a bar or a dialogue, centered to the corner of your page. If you were to do an orientation of your product, use a slider or use the same page guide, starting with a simple dialogue, followed by tooltips. So these are just specific best practices and guidances around, use case specific, which feedbacks should you take, which specific in-product asset you should use based on the use case. So this deck will be shared with you based on your use case. Besides the release experience, feel free to leverage these best practices. So that's that from my side. You can reach me on LinkedIn or on my email ID, which is hbanka, my last name, at gainsight.com. That's my work email ID, but super available on LinkedIn also. Feel free to ask me any follow-up questions, share your feedback, tell me what resonated with you, what did not. I'd love to hear from you what you thought about this, and any other questions that you may have. And also quickly to wrap up here, on October 14th and 16th, Gainsight is hosting a 3-day free conference, which is purely for product managers, the Pulse for Product. There'll be around 4 tracks, 20 sessions, 3 keynotes, expecting about 5,000 plus attendees here. The 4 tracks would be level up your product strategy, level up your customer experience, level up your team and career, and level up your product stack. So super excited, looking forward to it. I'm speaking here, a few product leaders from Adobe and Autodesk, Cloudflare. So we have some super lineup of speakers there. We also have the CEO of Product School, Carlos, take one of the sessions. So we will look forward to you joining us on this conference. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you on LinkedIn or on my email address at hbanka@gainsight.com. Thank you.